Time for me to stream. I know I never normally do midnight streams, but I had a music stream planned for tonight, and it went awry. And then I got a really bad stomach ache, and it went away. So I thought I'd pop on and talk a little bit about some things that I've observed. People have a lot of difficulty navigating their way out of the matrix mind. You know, it's a very difficult thing to overcome instinct, which is essentially what you're doing when you try to rewrite the blueprints of your being. You know, we have a profound connection between our instincts and our psychological constitution and disposition. You know, so there is a lot of resistance when it comes time to deprogram religious influence that are generally inculcated into our being when we're very, very young. You know, before we can talk, if you have a family that's religious, you are exposed to that indoctrination. You know, and then on the political level, you are allied with those that you believe to be good. You know, your parents generally teach you that your side are the good guys. You know, the Democrats that I've known, when it comes time for them to recognize that their leaders are also POSs, you know, they have a tremendous difficulty. What is it called? There's a name for this in psychology. Identity addiction. Right? And they identify with these leaders to such an extent that admitting there's something wrong with the leader is actually like admitting that there's something wrong with themselves, and to the same degree. They actually become identified on some level with that leader. And again, this is connected to instinct, the ape tendency to, or the ape instinct to have, you know, an alpha male, right? So one of the first things that we have to do in order to detect all of these things in ourselves, you know, because this really is an individual process. Like, nobody's going to do it for you. No one can do it for you. It's up to us. Developing the skill set to be effective at it is very difficult as well. Objectivity towards self, for example, goes against instinct. Again, what's up, man? Yeah, I guess that's the nice thing about doing it really late. People that don't normally get to watch live can join us. But you know what I mean? Objectivity towards self, extremely difficult. But anyways, I'm getting off track. What I was saying is that one of the primary, you know, objectives, the foundational shit is what you have to target. So looking for these instinct-driven patterns in our own being, and that is, you know, a huge first step. And that brings us to the other subject that I had mentioned, which is objectivity towards self, right? In order to, hey, is that Max from Substack? How's it going? By the way, if you guys don't follow me on Substack, it'd be good if you did, because it's a great environment. Even if you're not there to follow me, still go get an account, because it's just amazing. The sense of a community that is actually working towards some sort of meaningful revolution is amazing. And it really does seem like the algorithm is not stilted or biased against free-thinking people. There's no political bias either. You know, X said that they were going to not censor, and it went up 21%. And you know, they won't censor you if you're right wing and you have the same views as Elon Musk and that sort of, you know, Rumble is also the same way, and all the other ones are left leaning. But Substack really actually seems to be free and open. So really happy about that. So let's get back to the objectivity towards self thing. You know, and this actually includes family as well. I work as a plant medicine facilitator, and when it comes to addressing trauma from childhood and parents, there's often a lot of resistance to that, because people don't want to be angry. They don't want to blame. They don't want to resent. And so they don't want to acknowledge, and that's not going to work. That can't, you have to, it's like if you have a cold or if you have cancer and you diagnose for a cold and treat for a cold, then you're going to die from cancer. This is the same exact thing, right? So this objectivity towards self and others really has its roots in forgiveness. If you can understand that behaviors are emergent, right? They are the product of influences. And of course, there are exceptions. There are people that are just chemically predispositioned to psychopathy and things like that. But there's even a lot of evidence that autism and neurodivergence is the result of narcissistic abuse specifically. And that's definitely the case with me. And I don't know of a single other person who is on the spectrum that doesn't have at least one narcissist parent, right? So the trick here is the original sin, basically. When it comes time to confront these things, to confront self, instead of beating yourself up about something, instead of resenting and hating your parents, it's not about that. You remember that these are the endpoint for the expression of influences that are not their fault. The people that have victimized you have also been victims themselves in most cases, and so this sort of original sin sort of divests you of the need for blame and resentment. And it's really only then that you can start to analyze yourself without obstructing your own processes, right? Because if you are afraid of your own judgment, then you will never start the process, or when you do, you will use selective perception and other forms of cognitive bias to evade things that need to be confronted, So if you can achieve that level of neutrality and understanding for yourself, then you can start to truly change your behavior and understand yourself and see yourself for who and what you really are. And then this carries over and applies to others, because the lens that you view yourself through is going to determine how you see the external world and everything in it, right? So this brings us to the collective crisis of purpose in a kind of roundabout way, because in the modern, institutionally approved ontological model, the universe is without purpose. It is dead and blind. It is just a bunch of random gobbledygook that somehow assembled itself due to an electrical shock or whatever. You know what I mean? If you believe that, then you perceive yourself to have no purpose, and vice versa. If you are a person with no purpose, then the universe has no purpose. And without purpose, have you ever seen anything succeed without a purpose? You know what I mean? This purposelessness, this existential crisis, is protected and sustained in part by the fact that people don't know how to navigate their emotional traumas. They don't know the original sin secret, and we have so much trauma and so much dissonance at this point that the majority of people aren't even concerned with escaping from it. They don't know what liberation entails and what the promise is of transcendent states of mind, what the gift is. This is something I've been thinking a lot about in music. We used to have a few major acts out there that genuinely tapped into what I call gnosis-inducing energy. Their music was capable of lifting the consciousness of people to another level. And they did not necessarily stay there entirely, but they didn't go back down to where they were before either. And when this energy enters into the music, things happen that are hard to believe. And we don't have that happening, as far as I can tell, in the culture anymore. And there are other ways that this is expressed that I feel like we're lacking, So it's like without that intimation of what lies ahead if you are able to expand your consciousness and free your mind, and all of these other things that it's contingent upon. You know what I mean? Like, people don't know what they're after because there's no examples. Okay, so that's one aspect of all this, and this part one, I'm just going to kind of like weave through bullet points kind of presentation style, and then in subsequent installments of the series we'll get deeply into these subjects. But another thing that I've noticed that people really struggle with that is essential for achieving real illumination and seeing actual truth is the epistemological to know the knowledge, to know the limits of knowledge, and to be able to accept that they exist. Fear of the unknown drives just about every horror in on the planet, in human history. It is the reason that institutionalized religions are able to make slaves and zombies of people. It is the reason that politicians and governments are able to exploit. It's the reason for a lot of things. Hoarding money, fear of the unknown, right? So people don't want to confront that. They don't want to admit that at the end of the day, you are not going to ever know whether reincarnation is real for sure, whether there is an afterlife, and various other things under that category. Faith is, what did Aleister Crowley say? I drank and danced all night with faith and found a corpse in my arm upon awakening. I drank and danced all night with doubt and found her a virgin in the morning. Doubt everything, doubt all, doubt even doubt. And I'll give a couple of examples of like why this is true, right? I've had a lot of experiences that strongly suggest I'm the reincarnation of a certain person. I mean, and patterns in my life, things that I did with people of the same age on the same day, the same, you know what I mean? Like it's completely insane. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the reincarnation of this person. It could be that we have a common ancestor and it's genetic memory. It could be that there definitely is a Akashic record. Information's not lost at the quantum level, and so there's potentially a resonance that is left behind that people of very similar vibrational signatures could echo. So, and also a lot of these cases in India where the guy knows where a corpse is buried, or and he has this scar or whatever. These are every case that I've seen. They're very small villages with a lot of incest, so everyone's related, and then genetic memory. So, you can see that there is teleology in nature. That there is some kind of intelligence inherent in it. Science now tells us that neurons are not required for consciousness. And there is some evidence for quantum consciousness, that consciousness arises from entangled photon pairs, which is what I think is probably correct, because, light has been regarded as a source of consciousness by just about every ancient culture. Gold is equated with consciousness in several ancient cultures that I'm aware of, and light. It just seems like this is sort of an intuitive thing that is super obvious. And if anything in the universe is divine, it's light. Because light is the only thing we know of that might be eternal. It has a photon, lives at least 1 billion years, but probably forever. It's weightless, massless. Basically, it's almost not even there, and yet it gives life to everything, just like spirit. It's like spirit incarnate. It is, I think, really. That's what light is. It's basically God floating around, creating stuff and destroying things. So yeah, I mean, we have slime molds solving mazes, out engineering people with computers, plants with memory, plants that can count. We know that neurons are not necessary for cognition at this point. So you can take these things and go, okay, well, probably there's at least some kind of intelligence. And then you can also look at like the idea of light cones, Michael Levin's light cones, right? You have very fundamental levels of consciousness, like particles, and they have behaviors though, and so that represents it's coherent behavior, and they do things and they interact and they respond to things. So in his opinion, that's an intelligence. That's the most fundamental level of intelligence. And if you expand that, you end up with chemicals that also have some sort of intelligence, and you expand to single-celled organisms, and then to bigger and bigger things, right, until you have a planet. Well, why would you assume that the light cone doesn't extend beyond that, you know? So it's like there are good reasons to believe that there is something like God, there's some sort of universal mind, some sort of integrated intelligence that is perhaps even ubiquitous throughout the wiring under the board of the universe, you know. I happen to be of that opinion for sure, but I do not know for certain. And certainty is the death of intelligence. You know, you stop growing, you stop learning, you stop exploring when you think that you know anything, and only a madman is absolutely certain. Faith is for fools. I'm sorry, you know, if you have that faith, but it's a fact, and it is not helpful. People have been raised in our culture to believe that faith is virtuous. To believe things without reason, on no account at all, is nothing but stupidity and insanity. There's no virtue in it at all, you know. And you have been taught that there's virtue in it so that you will conform to this standard of believing obviously stupid things that serve the purposes of your overlords. You know, it really is that simple. It really is that simple. And what you find is that this monstrous abyss that you thought you feared is actually a featherbed, and that the mystery and the fascination and the engagement that you have with a living universe is way more rewarding. The unknowing, the not knowing creates possibilities and expands them from finite to infinite, you know, because the more you do not know, the more is possible, if you understand what I'm saying. And it's also true that if you exclude certain things from the realm of possibility in your microcosm, you will not perceive them to a large extent. You know, you can define your experience through limitation if you like, but I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, it's necessary to some extent. If we didn't define things by limitation, then everything would be infinite, you know, but yeah. To allow for possibilities means that you admit that you do not know. And I think the biggest release lever, the release mechanism, is admitting that you're never going to know certain things until you're dead. He who speaks does not know, or how's it go? He who knows does not speak, and he who speaks does not know. Period. End of story. There's no exceptions. There's no way around it. Unless you have direct experience of a thing, you do not know it. You just think it. You know? There's no, like, I know it in my heart. You know, if you need to debunk that as a, like, metric for knowing, just look around the world at how many completely insane people believe insane things with absolute conviction. You know, and when someone says, well, I know I'm not doing that, all they're saying is that my ego is not in balance. Because they think they're exempt from something that's just a human tendency, you know, to accept delusions as truth as a coping mechanism. And here's another level of this. In my own sort of shamanic training, one of the things that I learned, and you learn these things not by being told, but again, through context and experience. You know, you go through something that proves it. And so fear draws danger. Being able to control your own energy and regulate your own energy determines your experience on levels that most muggle-minded people would not be able to accept. but I know this to be a fact, and I've tested it to the point where my life was, if it wasn't true, I'd be dead. So even if you're not walking around with a heart full of fear and a head full of confusion, if you are still dependent upon faith, for example, if you are still afraid to admit that you do not know, if you still have these sort of foundational aspects of yourself that are rooted in fear, you are still a danger to yourself. It is not until you have completely eradicated all of these sort of magnetic attractors, they're not sort of, they are electromagnetic attractors of the danger that you're afraid of. That's how it works. People talk a lot about manifestation and how, you just need to have a certain vibration to attract things to you. And that's true to a large extent. A lot of these coaches, or whatever you want to call them, they definitely have profit motive in mind, and they oversell these ideas and make it sound a lot easier than it actually is. But there is definitely truth to it. But what they don't mention is that the fear also will draw the things that you're afraid of. So beyond just not being fearful and paranoid, you have to look for the roots. The things that we accept and take for granted as normal that are not must be removed by subtlety or force, but they must be removed. Yeah, so by the way, this is definitely two-way. I don't see a lot of questions or comments in the thingy. So also, we're demonetized, so if you like this content, it's great if you support us. Patreon, 7 years, I think, of premium material. We go through a lot of Masonic degrees and other sort of occulty stuff, and you can also sign up for consultations, guitar lessons. I do all kinds of things. Jack of all trade, master of some. All right, so fear we have dealt with. Trauma we have talked about a little bit. Then there's the technical knowledge side of, having the sort of consciousness that I think will be baseline for the new paradigm. It's, this moment that we're in right now, I don't think it's an exaggeration or paranoia to say that we're confronted with a couple of options: extinction or rapid evolution. We have to change the way that we interface with reality, or we don't really even deserve to be here, honestly. I mean, privileges are one, and the metamorphosis that lies ahead of us entails the acquisition of a tremendous amount of power, personal sovereignty, and with that power comes great responsibility, right? So it doesn't make sense for the human race to make it any further if we're not going to get any wiser and more beneficent. We will be subject to de-emphasis and de-evolution because we do not serve the purposes of creation and life. That is how nature works. That is as above, so below. That is taking the evolutionary model and then expanding it to apply to us, right? People don't really think about that, but that's it, really. We are on the verge of acquiring something like, acquiring literal immortality, right? This is, by some estimates, like Michael Levin's, like 5 to 15 years out or something, which means that probably the elites already have it. Teleportation has been, how do you say, more sophisticated. They started out with just information and then light, and So we're getting closer and closer to being, you know what I'm saying? And then our access to information, computational powers, AI integrations, all of this kind of stuff. Every single human having access to the kind of power that we don't even have a reference point for yet. And this is incoming very, very rapidly, And I really do believe things in the universe can go either way. There is no guarantee, If we can take the personal responsibility for sovereignty and have the courage and release the fear in time, then we may enter into a new epoch of undescribable joys and unlimited creativity, nearly unlimited, But if we don't adapt to make ourselves fit receptacles for that gift, we are done. There will be no more of us. And that's what's up. Peyote is definitely our friend. That is true. Does history have any certainty of truth? I'm not sure what you mean. You mean, do ancient people, did they know the truth? Or can we be certain that history is true? Or, you know what I mean? I don't know exactly what you mean there, but I can say that, it's not black and white like that. Reason in the tradition that I am an initiate of is basically God, So when and here's why the beneficence and utility of it is nearly omnipotent, so for example, a conspiracy theory, if it requires too many conspirators, then you can rule it out right away. You know what I mean? Flat Earth, not possible. Too many conspirators required. It's absolutely stupid. Adrenochrome is also completely stupid, but for different reasons. I'm trying to think of another one that is ruled out because of too many conspirators. But, I'm just trying to demonstrate that's the kind of logic you can use to ascertain things in history. Like a lot of people are Holocaust deniers, right? But what are all the hairs and shoes and stuff, And the numbers possibly are inflated. So, you know what I mean? I guess what I'm saying is you can't take anyone's word for anything really, but you have to look at the evidence and, judge each thing by the merits. You know what I mean? That's the only way to go. I mean, there's a lot of historians in the world, and the more people from more countries are looking at something, the less of a chance there is of like bias or outright cover up or any of that, So those are the kind of metrics that you have to use for that. What I was saying about adrenochrome actually is that it's stupid because they say that it comes from babies' adrenal glands, which are extremely tiny and hold only a couple of micrograms. A dose of adrenochrome is milligrams. So, you're going to need a truckload of babies to get like one dose. And if you did take it, it would cause rapid aging, panic attacks, profuse sweating, coma, possibly death. Like, it's not something that you would take for fun. And watch the elites getting old. Bill Clinton looks like shit. I think I just said this in the last stream, but you know what I mean? So, and then as far as historical things, I'll give you an example of something that does not, a non sequitur, in American history. The Revolutionary War. They claim that what at the time was the biggest empire and most powerful empire in human history sent a handful of people over to squash this colonial rebellion. When a nation is divided against itself, it's in no shape to defend itself or to go to war, right? And we had roughly half the colonists were on the king's side, okay? So they said that the biggest empire, the strongest, the most powerful empire in the entire world lost to a badly divided, poorly armed, disorganized, crawling with traitors group of colonists because they stood there in lines and waited until they were told to shoot while the colonists hid behind rocks and picked them off. I don't know about you, but I find it a little bit difficult to accept that an empire that had managed to grow to that size and level of power had bad martial strategy. That's not how you fucking become the biggest empire in the world. It's so goddamn stupid. It is disgraceful that they actually tell people that shit. Probably what actually happened is that they had MI5 operatives set up the government here, make sure some tax money was flowing back to the crown. That's what they always do. They've done it with Australia, Canada, Jamaica. It's a lot easier, and you will have more revenue when the peasants are content to go on about their business. So okay, you guys win, fuck it. Like, nothing actually changed. I think it was probably a farce. So I hope that helps. I don't know if I really answered your question even. Light always comes with shadow, the yin yang. What really matters is a choice to align with it or not. Well, yeah, I would say that light and shadow are actually dependent upon each other. They create each other. In fact, if matter is light in a standing wave, then shadow is literally created by light. It's created by light in both the shining light and the physical object are light making shadow, I guess is the point of that. And also vacuum, nothingness, was observed to be able to create vacuum. Light came from a vacuum in a laboratory a little while back. So something from nothing has happened in a laboratory, which is further evidence that this hermetic axiom that things produce their opposite is true all the way to the most fundamental thing, which is nothingness producing something. How that's possible, do not ask me, but yeah. And that's one of the great difficulties of illuminated thinking. This is something that horrifies a lot of people and drives them away, and they don't want to hear any more about it when they realize the implications of that statement. And that statements like that don't just apply to physical systems. They also apply to non-physical systems. The same laws regulate everything. And the idea that you cannot do good without creating evil, and when you do evil, you're creating good, is extremely distasteful to people, and for good reason. But this isn't my opinion. This is the Buddha mentioned this and said the only way to escape karma then is to just sit down and do nothing until you die. This just neutral. That's the only way to stay out of it. Saint John of the Cross, he said, "So should we sin that grace may come? God forbid." But isn't that what he did himself when he created Satan with the germ of his fall in him? Who else? Oh, I know there's more. But, you guys get the point. This is the reason for the sacrifice of Jesus in the New Testament. The sacrifice of an innocent person in a horrible death is the worst thing you can do, and that will create the greatest good, which is the salvation of mankind. That's the logic. This is why virgin children were sacrificed by the Incas and the Aztecs and whatnot. Every culture basically on Earth understood this and engaged in the practice at some point. Also, the belief was that if you could conduct where the forces of destruction and death manifest, then it won't happen at random in your civilization. So you choose something and you do it deliberately, and then that contains that force that is inevitably going to be present. And I'm not necessarily voting for this as a practice. I'm just saying that that's the reason and the logic. And I know that it has basis in fact, so. And in their defense, the Incas, at least I know, were really kind about it. It was considered a great honor. And the volunteer was selected like 9 months in advance, and they were sent to live with the emperor. And they were given, the finest foods and luxury and everything up until the day at Ollantaytambo. And they were given coca leaves for a few days to keep them awake, to make them delirious. Then at the end, they were given ayahuasca on the night of the event. And the interesting thing about this, one of the interesting things, is that the bodies that have been found have no cause of death. It's not that they were given a lethal amount of ayahuasca, because there's no edema or any evidence of that. There's no sign of strangulation. There's no sign of toxicity in the organs. There is nothing at all that explains how they died. So it appears that it was extremely humane, and even they could have just been sort of downloaded, by all appearances, or uploaded, I guess, into the cloud. Would be a better way to put it. And if it's true that we're eternal, and that process keeps us from chaotic evil, and it was totally humane, I don't have any judgment against them, really, and I don't know that we should. I'm not saying we should bring it back, because it obviously didn't work. The conquistadors came, so it didn't keep them at bay. The age of Aquarius, Saturn's alignment, old structure dissolves. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really into the whole Christ light idea. I'm actually pretty severely anti-Christian, because Christ was not a person. It's just the Christos was Greek for spiritual fire, and it's something similar to Kundalini awakening. And it's true that without this Christos in your heart, you will suffer in hell, and you will be miserable, and you will be without purpose, and you will not be saved. But it's not a person. And Christ was engineered by the Roman consulate in the 3rd century, or perhaps a bit earlier, I guess. The 3rd century actually was when they banned the mysteries. So it was earlier that they engineered the Christ myth. But it's not real. He never lived. And really, of all of the great spiritual leaders, he's the least impressive. Because, he said, don't throw rocks at hookers and be nice to people. It's like, okay, that's so profound, dude, And really, at the end of the day, it is the most important and primary and most powerful of spiritual teachings, right? Love thy neighbor as you would love thyself. So that single line there does kind of make him King of Kings, right? But overall, I'm just saying, I'm more impressed by Eliphas Levi, Aleister Crowley, Timothy Leary. These guys had something to say, and that's one of the other things about the Bible that really kind of proves that it is trash, is the fact that anyone that looks at it, if they knew, if it was God's work, no one would doubt it for a second. There would be no non-believers. You know what I mean? It would be really, really obvious. And I know for a fact that when people are confronted with things that are of a truly transcendental nature like that have that divine spark, it is evident, and they do not doubt it for a second. They may have to be opened up a little bit with entheogens or something in order to perceive it in the first place, but they do perceive it. So it's not like some people just would deny it or something. You know what I mean? There would be no getting around it. So, yeah, there's that. And the other reason, of course, that I despise Christianity is that it is a weaponized religion. It was built on the bones of Hermeticism. A lot of the stories are based on Hermes. The caduceus became the staff of Moses that turned into a snake in the desert. The acacia, which was the tree of initiation in the older mysteries in Egypt, was, of course, the wood used for the Ark of the Covenant. What's another one? David and Goliath was based on, and this is wild, Hermes slaying the giant Argus Panoptes, which means the shining all-seeing one, the all-seeing eye. He was all covered in eyes. He was literally the all-seeing eye. Hermes, which, by the way, is like one of my main, I guess, subjects on this channel has been that this kind of knowledge that we often call hermetic is the number one enemy of the state, a sentiment echoed by people like Albert Pike, the 33rd degree Freemason, and Aristotle and Plato. That Rome feared free thought more than it feared vice and crime. So the fact that Hermes slew the all-seeing eye in that old myth is wild. But yeah, that became David and Goliath. Of course, in the ancients of days, man had truth and lost truth and found error in the name of Jesus, right? So we knew that light was the source of consciousness, and sun was not worshipped in the way that people like to paint it, religious people, but it was acknowledged as the source of our soul, S-O-L. You put a U in it and you have the individual soul, S-O-U-L, right? So that's why Jesus is like, I am the light of the world, and he walks on water because sunlight walks on water. It reflects on water, and he spent 3 days on the Southern Cross. I mean, the sun spends 3 days on the Southern Cross, 3 days in the tomb, stops moving December 23rd, 24th, and 25th, or appears to anyways from our vantage point. You know what I mean? Like, and the reason that they did that is that people, as I was saying, people recognize divinity. They know the truth because the truth is divinity. It is self-substantiating, self-replicating, and eternal because it is light. And that's why they draped these myths over the skeleton of truth that they had ravaged and corrupted and arred and profaned and blasphemed with their control of the sovereign wills of humanity. They even call him the shepherd and his flock the sheep. I mean, come on, man. And like, people argue, well, he taught some good things, so we should keep it around. No, we shouldn't. We should burn it so black that it's beyond the capacity for human memory to recall it. My son knew to be cool when he was born. He did not need to be taught that, and he has not been untaught that, so he's still cool. We don't need Jesus for anything. It is nothing but detriment. It is the devil. It is a harm farm. We already have truth. We just need to redintegrate it into the minds of humanity. It's very, very simple. Truth to the extent that it can be known, there are limitations. But those limitations also serve a purpose. If all knowledge was fulfilled, all possibilities would be fulfilled, and the universe would come to an end. That's the way I understand it. And that's actually what happens. The cyclical process on the universal scale is expansion and contraction, systole and diastole, like a heart beating or a lung moving, because it's a living thing, and all living things have this systole, diastole, expansion, contraction thing going on, right? And so once all of the possibilities are fulfilled without, everything is possible without having to override natural law, it reverses and collapses back into singularity. And the reason it blows up is that all of the particles remain the same size, no matter how small the universe gets. And so eventually the pressure of that is so tremendous that it causes another singularity and the whole thing starts over again. One of the reasons that we know this is that you can look at or one of the things we know about this also, I guess I should say, probably, of course this isn't absolute, but it something I saw in a vision 10 years before quantum loop theory was conceived by physicists. And, there are other older conceptions of it, I think. But if you look at an acorn, you will not get an acorn from an acorn unless it has a history of acorns, right? It's got to have oaks. You're not going to get an oak from an acorn unless it has the blueprint for oak in it by having been oaks before. You might argue, well, how did all this start then if it had to have a record? But do we see how that works as well? Things basically replicate by reflection at first, and then they become more sophisticated over time. So the evolutionary process as represented by amphibians and whatnot also applies to the universe. So the record of every single person, everything, you know what I mean? It's all in there because when it collapses, everything is retained on the quantum layer. That's why everything is retained. And then when it expands again, there are slight improvements and slight changes. And really, for me, this is the leading possibility for, there's no afterlife exactly. We're not really reincarnated. We live the same life over and 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 over with tiny variations as it moves towards perfection. That's what the universe is doing. And it's written all over it that, that's what's up. Probably. Maybe, baby. Somebody asked, is it possible to receive downloads without drug insistence? Yes, it absolutely is. And I'm actually in the middle of proving a download type scenario of basically every AI and academic that I've had evaluate it so far has said it's the most convincing instance of this that they've ever seen. The Grok said that the chances that I could have guessed correctly are 1 in the trillions. So basically, I was thinking that, everything has to have a mechanism. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. We're demonetized, so we get no compensation unless we get support from the community. And this community actually has become there's a lot of long-term friendships, people really genuinely helping each other and whatnot. So, when you become a patron in this community, it's generally there's more of an impact than just like supporting a creator, if that's how you want it to be. And I do think that unity and unity of purpose and community is essential, or we're fucked, right? So things to consider. You can also make one-time contributions in the chat. We have plant medicine products available at IllumiGnosis.com and whatnot. So where was I? Okay, so the Calabi-Yau manifold thing. I was thinking that because everything requires a mechanism, right? This is one of the places where superstition goes off the rails. People this causes atheism too. People think that magic is about doing impossible things, or that prayer is about doing impossible things. It's not. It's about increasing the probability of success in a thing that is possible. Your will can manifest, but it has to have actual conduits to act upon and through. Otherwise, shit's not happening. So I was thinking the universal mind has to have some kind of mechanism. It must have a translation layer at the quantum levels somehow. And I thought, well, is it Fourier transforms and the Euler formula are going to be important constituents, and mirror symmetry is going to come into play, because I know that the universe's process of creation is about replication through reflection. But it's kind of the point that I didn't really know a lot about the mathematics and whatnot, because things just popped into my head. And the next thing that I caught was the Calabi-Yau manifold. I had no idea what it was, but I just saw the name when I was looking at mirror symmetry. And so I popped it into the AI that I was using to consolidate all this stuff and to do the math for me. And it turns out that the Calabi-Yau manifold determines the mass and trajectory of particles. And that is exactly what it would do if it was a neuron of the universal mind. So I was like, damn, that's weird, And after having the AI expand and explain and doing all this Wikipedia research and stuff, it started to dawn on me that I had found the three fundamental things that I would need to describe this conversion layer. Then, after a week of calling the Calabi-Yau manifolds neurons of the universal mind, I discovered that they host brains. Which, what the hell? And so what originally got me started thinking about this is that I knew that light and gold had some kind of connection, and that connection must be demonstrable and describable, and but it's something on the order of allegory. And that kind of ties it into the mind thing, that part of the creative process being allegory practically proves that there's a universal mind that's behind this, right? So I thought, well, there's no chemical relationship. There's obviously no elemental relation. You know what I mean? Like, what are you going to find? So I figured it would have to be some kind of resonance that was detectable through harmonic resonance imaging. And so, we got some problems there because photons move way too fast to get them to hold still for, imaging. And I thought this is going to be a problem. So I got a bit stuck there. And a little while later, I was describing all this to a guy that has a PhD in computer science and a lesser degree in mathematics. Right? He knew a lot about this stuff, and I showed him, what the AI interactions, and he's like, "Man, that's just insane," And bearing in mind that I really abbreviated this for you guys, there was a lot more in terms of, I just knew the functions of all these things and constructed this just purely intuitively. And you can see in the AI interactions that there's no guessing. I just knew immediately what the next thing was. And so after talking to him, though, he was like, but you just need to get a doctorate, man, because nobody's really going to listen to you otherwise, And I thought, well, I'm 46 years old. I have a seventh grade education. I don't know how viable getting a doctorate really is. And plus, by the time I did that, I'm sure AI will have told us about this anyways, so I'm not going to do that. But then I was thinking, well, what is the obstacle that I'm going to hit, right? And I thought, and how do I overcome it, with this theory? And I thought, well, there's going to have to be a harmonic there's going to be a resonant geometry that can be described, and it would be detected in these things that have this allegorical relationship across scales, right? So I wake up the next day after coming to this, literally the next morning, I look at my phone, and there's a guy from the Langlands program being interviewed on Friedman. And he's like, we found this resonant geometry that's more fundamental than particles that we have identified across scales, from the quantum to the macro and on and on and on and on and on. So then I thought, okay, well, that's insane. Oh, and Calabi-Yau manifolds were the mechanism creating this. And then he mentioned the Euler equation and the Fourier formulas or whatever, and so all of the math that I had honed in on, plus the Calabi-Yau manifolds in the brains, were actually the things that they thought were responsible for this resonance they had discovered. And I did a stream about this months before it was published. No one can dispute that I talked about it in detail with a full understanding of all the concepts for no reason, because there's no reason for me to know that stuff. I absolutely can prove it. It's crazy. I have 100% rock solid proof. And then beyond that even, I thought, okay, well, we have another problem. How are we going to get light to hold still in order to measure or I don't even know what you scan for the resonance. I don't know how to even talk about that. But I thought, well, we're going to have to get it to hold still. And the next day, after jumping through these hoops, or within a few days, I saw a post about how a new state of matter had been created out of light. And I thought, I wonder if changing it into matter. Well, it's not matter. It's both a liquid and a solid or something, or a gas and a solid. No, a liquid and a solid. I think somehow it's like both. And I thought, well, maybe that'll mess up this resonance, But otherwise, that's what they have to do. They have to match light, this solid light, slow light. With the gold. And guess what? That's the first thing they did. Like right away, there was a study, and they're like, yeah, there is a resonance that shared somehow light and gold are the same thing. So I was ahead of the scientific developments on that the whole way through, and there's proof. There's absolutely proof on this YouTube channel. Indisputable proof. No, like 2 PhDs have looked at it and 3 different AIs, and they're all of the same opinion that it constitutes proof of an order that probably no one's ever seen. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly what to do with this. And that's something that's happened to me a few times in my life. It's often not clear what it is. Like one time I was thinking about light and just the universe. I don't remember exactly what. And I had the thought, but nothing's faster than light. And this voice in my head said, consciousness is faster than light. And I knew it was true, but I didn't know what it meant. And now I have the language. If consciousness arises from entangled particles, that's why it's faster than light, And I have no doubt that whatever that was in my head knew that, The thing is, access to information of that kind, it's not something that I think anyone can do consistently. I've never seen a person, I'm not aware of any person that can do it. This is one of the reasons science disregards it, but it's a real phenomenon. And if it's true that the universe is a quantum loop that retains all of the information on every cycle, then all of the information that was here last time is still there and it's still available, And I don't know if there's a filter in my brain that does not work, or if I represent an evolutionary adaptation where the filter has just been decreased, because that's what would happen as we are more sophisticated in our consciousness and able to process and navigate a greater bandwidth of signals. Greater, is it a bandwidth or broad? Whatever, you know what I mean. Broader spectrum, broader bandwidth of the spectrum. Right? Let me look at the chat. Man, it's getting late. Support us, y'all. Don't forget about that. It's helpful. It's very helpful. I got kids to feed. Mass human sacrifice. We're still on that. Whoa, this just keeps unfolding. Have you heard of monatomic gold? Hell yeah, I have. Yeah, sure. I'm down to. I don't know about teaming up in terms of time. Depends on what you mean, but I would definitely guest when I have time. I'm more convinced there's an infinite multiverse where all possibilities are created. That's also possible. But I think that would happen in all of these multiverses. The laws that govern creation are inexorable. Is that a good word? Is that even a word I'm looking for? You know what I mean? They're not different in different dimensions. Physicists recently announced that inevitable. Yeah, that's the word. Inexorable is fine. Yeah, the hermetic understanding of this, or the initiated perspective, I guess, the truth is what I should really just say, because it is. is that the laws of the universe are not just because they're God's laws. They're God's laws because they are just. Not meaning fair, but meaning that the laws of creation are predicated along the lines that they are, because if they were any other way, then creation would not be sustainable. You know what I mean? The balance, perfect balance of opposites and good and evil and all of the stuff that like is hard for us to reconcile. And a lot of people deny the existence of any kind of higher intelligence because of their presence in our universe. Like, why would God make things this way? Well, because there's only one way to make creation, and this is it. You know, it's made along the lines that it is because of the law of necessity. Everything is governed by the law of necessity first and foremost. You know, it is the way that it is because it must be that way. And there's no other alternative. This is one of the reasons I don't really believe in heaven, you know, because it's not going to be real. There's either nothingness or things constituted upon the laws of creation out of sheer necessity. So this is the only world, you know. There may be other universes, but they're still going to operate on the same laws with just different outcomes. Slight variations, probably. But also, I mean, when you're saying, I think that there are infinite multiverses, is that based on reason or just like a hunch or something you want to believe, you know? Because there's not really much evidence in favor of that opinion. I'm not saying it's not possible, but there certainly isn't much evidence for it. And there's plenty of evidence against it, you know, like the law of necessity. What for? All right. Well, let me look at the chat again and see if we got questions. By the way, no, I'm not high at all. How does this play into numerology? Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, I am an 11 life path. Actually, I wasn't surprised to see that because 11 is like... Before I ever heard of 1111 from anyone else, my girlfriend one day asked me about the numerology of the number 11. And I started saying what I knew, telling her what I knew, and she was on the floor with a big piece of paper. I'm trying to remember what you call that kind of paper. Kids always use it, you know, construction paper. And she was drawing, and she had a 24-inch ruler, right? And she started like, you know, grumbling, and I was like, "What is your problem? You know, why are you asking me all this stuff and then just making all this noise or whatever?" You know what I mean? And she's like, "I don't even know." And she looked at the ruler, and it had two 11s printed on it. One 11 where it should be, and the other one where 23 is supposed to be, which is also a number associated with synchronicity. You know, and I was like, "Well, that's weird." And then a few weeks later, we found ourselves at this talk that was given by a Sioux Sundance chief and a bunch of other people, but he was kind of the principal guy, I guess, called Golden Light Eagle. And there was a Hawaiian shaman that made the wind blow, and like, you know, it was a crazy group of people. But he had called us there to talk about 1111. And this was like a week after the ruler, 2 weeks after the ruler or something, you know. So I'm kind of answering two questions at once there, I guess. But the reason for those kind of correspondences, right? They're glyphs, they're you know, symbols of processes, and it's difficult. It's not difficult. It's actually really easy to understand. Our subconscious integrates meaning into things in ways that we're not necessarily that aren't going to be perceptibles for us necessarily, right? So 0, for example, what happens if you divide a number by 0, right? So 0 contains infinity. The only infinite thing actually is nothingness. And so this property of being both infinite and empty is the symbol, 0, an infinite line. You could go around it forever in a circle, but then there's nothingness in the center of it. And that's also a glyph of the universe by a lot of estimations, that the absolute, what we actually think of as God is nothing. It's absolute nothingness. And the reason for creation is that there are two options. We can be in that perfection, which is absolute nothingness, because as soon as there is a shadow, a line, a mark, a stain, a vibration, whatever, that is a blasphemy against God, right? It's a stain on the face of perfection, this nothingness. And so it's either duality and pain and suffering and love and joy and all this mixture of perfect opposites. What is it? A perfect union of contrary things? Yeah, it's either that or just absolute nothingness. So that's the 0, right? And then 11 is a glyph of symmetry. The 111 is the internal world. And in the Kabbalistic system, when you add a 0 or you get to higher digits, just as in regular math, it's an amplification of the thing, but in consciousness, right? So 11 is magical expansion, partly because it is the first letter after 10, but also because I think the solar cycles are 11 years on average, and our parapsychological capacities are deeply entrained with the sun cycles. So, yeah, number 11, magical expansion. But 1111 is a glyph of synchronicity because it has to do with once your internal has expanded, number of expansion inside, right? Your external world comes into symmetry and alignment and expands. So, you know, it has like layers of symbolic meaning. Also, it's 4, right? And 4 is the number of stability. So once you achieve this expansion and you start to experience these synchronicities, because there are higher orders of symmetry, right? And so you develop an awareness of that. You come into alignment with symmetry, homeostasis, balance, right? And then you stabilize on those 4 ones, right? So yeah, it's like when the conscious and subconscious start to change their ratio, or the ratio that you experience from them, your internal and external worlds come into balance because the subconscious is the external world also, you know. And then when you change that ratio, you develop an ability also to command the external world to a greater degree because you have more command over the subconscious and more control over it. This is one of the reasons we're facing extinction right now, because if we're going to come into these capacities regardless, but if you don't have control and you don't have understanding, then you are going to have too much power without enough wisdom, enthusiasm not tempered sufficiently by reason, and you're going to end up like Mickey Mouse in that cartoon where he steals his magician master's hat or whatever, and you know, all hell breaks loose. It's exactly that. So you ask what numerology has to do with this, and that's a decent example, I guess. Also, like the number 9 has a lot of lunar attributes, you know, and guess where it sits in the, you know, Yesod 9 illusion. 6 in the sun, the solar plexus happens to be number 6. A lot of these things are actually reflected in music as well, which is really interesting. The 6th degree is the inversion of the 1, which is the source or God that everything returns to. 5 being the number of cycles is the chord where we pivot. 7, which fractures things in division. If you play that over the 5 chord, you can actually modulate to 16 different keys equally well. And that's not 16, it's, let's see, it's 8 keys. There's only 12. But, well, there's 12 major and 12 minor, I suppose. But yeah, 8 keys, which is not something other chords do. The 6 up an octave is the 13th, another number associated with the devil, and on and on. Shit's goofy though. I don't know if I'm following this field's collapse into future life on Earth that's going to get more psychodrama for humans. You might be talking about the solar activity that, yeah, it's still increasing. There's a giant black spot on the sun right now. I need to look more into that. Talk more about a double 9 life path, or give your thoughts. I have no idea about that. I only know about the life path thing because someone said, I bet yours is 11, and I looked it up and it was. But here, I'll look it up right now, and then I guess if I have any comments to make on it, I will do so. Let's see. Double 9 life piggity pizzath. 9 represent thrice in the... What is this? This does not look like really good info, maybe. Here, I gotta move my camera because it's on my scooter. There we go. Numerology, a double 9 in your life path means both your life path and destiny number are 9. Suggests a strong emphasis on humanitarianism, compassion, and idealism. Individuals with this alignment are often driven by a desire to make a positive impact on the world and may dedicate their lives to serving others. Strong vision for a better future, selfishness and sacrifice. Well, that's all pretty self-explanatory. It's interesting, though, because the idea of double 9 suggests the inevitability of truth, right? In gematria, in certain systems of numerology, I guess might be a better way to say it, 9 is a number of truth because 9 multiplied by anything is reduced to 9 again. So the truth is always the truth. And 2 9s is just 9 because if you multiply them or add them and then reduce them, it's just 9 again. So it's kind of like something that has to do with inevitability. And these kind of humanitarian people with that disposition of like maybe excessive selflessness oftentimes are not happy. And it is because of an acute awareness of the truth, of certain aspects of the truth that are discomforting, right? So it may be of value to you to be mindful of where you put your focus, because that is the real cause of this existential despair that can come from having too much awareness. Aside from that, all of those positive qualities, if you feel that they apply to you, this is the time we need that more than ever. Resources are not to be hoarded. I've always said that if I had like $4 million, I don't know, I'd maybe have to update it for inflation now, but I figured it out before, where I could have, a decent house in Northern California, a house in the Amazon. I could still buy that Lamborghini Diablo that I wanted when I was, 8 or whatever, and I didn't even have a toilet in my house because we were so poor, just as a sign of victory, and it would be like a late 90s model, not $300,000 or whatever. And I could still leave something for my children. I would give every other penny away. It's just stupid. If you do anything other than that and you have more money than you need, you have mental illness, period, end of story. Every single person. And there are, cases where someone may need more money because they have innovations that they can offer or whatever, and society could accommodate that, but nobody needs more money than could pay for a couple of houses, buy them all their time for the rest of their life, eating out at a fine dining restaurant every single fucking night for the rest of your life, and still have, $500,000 to leave your children when you die. If you really think that you need to hoard more money than that while other people are starving, then you need to be like catapulted into the fucking sun, really, in my opinion. It's just fear, it's pathetic, and there's no debate that's necessary. When people defend billionaires, it's like, well, when you bring them to the gallows, you can go with them. Sayonara, cocksucker. Seriously, I mean, it's just so goddamn stupid, it's unbelievable. That anyone would not even, I would feel like an absolute piece of shit if I had like $20 million and I'm like driving by homeless people and not stopping to help every single one of them. That's what a human is, That's what a human is. If you don't have that, you need to get it because there's something wrong, something seriously fucking wrong, And I get it. Yeah, some of them it's their fault, but not really, because they probably all had trauma. They all had shit parents, almost every single one of them. You know what I mean? And some people are born in circumstances that are, next to impossible to overcome. Most of the people that say like, they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps came from upper middle class or middle class families, and they have no idea what it's like to be in the ghetto and to see the despair and the fuck. I do, because I lived in several of them. You're not going to see that green grass on the other side if you have never seen green grass before. Fool. Okay, so Reg asked how to change the ratio of subconscious to conscious governance in our brain. Psychedelics are number one. Somebody asked me about monoatomic gold, and I didn't answer earlier. Colloidal gold is extremely beneficial. It reduces neural inflammation, which is huge because not a lot of other things do that. It stores in the brain, and it has long been suspected that superconductors somehow facilitate the massive quantity of information that's processed by the brain every second, right? Because it just doesn't make sense otherwise. But superconductors are only superconductive at their critical temperature. And the brain is also too warm and noisy for quantum effects, supposedly. That's been disproven now. And also, photons have been observed emerging from neurons entangled by photon pairs, and also from microtubules. So there is light in the brain. Light makes gold superconductive on contact. So to enhance your cognition, improve your mood, reduce inflammation, also in other parts of the body, colloidal gold is like the most gangsta shit on the block, son. And so what was the other? Sorry, I forgot what the hell the other question was. Oh yeah, so just mentioning that because that facilitates all this other stuff I'm going to talk about. psychedelics are the best way to become more conscious. That's really what awakening is. It literally just means that you are less of an automaton. Something like 88% of our behavior is governed exclusively by the subconscious, according to psychology, and changing that ratio is what makes a master. It's what makes an iconoclast. It is what facilitates genius to an extent. And it's not just as simple as taking psychedelics. You have to engage with processes. You have to disentangle yourself from the influence of past traumas by confrontation and analysis while in these psychedelic states, right? Because a lot of your in my case at least, pretty much all of the self-sabotage, which was a huge fucking problem, like literally like being in hell for most of my life, because I could accomplish extraordinarily improbable things that I'd always dreamed of with ease, and I did it over and over again, but then I would destroy them as soon as I realized that it was fulfilled. Like, it's I don't even want to talk about it. But you know what I mean? Like, if I had done this work before setting out on that mission, then that probably wouldn't happen. So, you have to learn basic psychoanalytical skills, and you have to develop that objectivity in regards to yourself and your family in terms of analysis and blame and all that kind of stuff. You got to have that skill set. And then you have to learn how to watch for behaviors, mindfulness in your daily life. And when you notice things that you consider aberrations that need to be fixed, you have to find the prima mobile, the original cause, the thing that catalyzes behavior in the first place, as close as you can. With psychedelics and guidance, it is claimed and likely is true that it's possible to go all the way back to perinatal experiences and deal with that. Because if your mother was, unduly stressed or depressed or an alcoholic or a crackhead or something, and introduced toxic emotions or chemicals into your system, then that also can have a lifelong effect on you. So, you may want to take it to that level, especially if you know those things about your mother. For sure, you want to try to do that. Stanislav Grof has methods for that. But the reality is that psychedelics both decrease and increase communication between different hemispheres and parts of our brain. And that during that space where the door is open, you have a lot of opportunity to reconfigure the constituent elements, that are normally locked behind that door. You get that bitch open, start pulling skeletons out of the closet, And there are conditioning tricks too, metaprogramming. The most effective thing that I have come across is pranayama with a moderate dose of LSD. LSD is the most, efficacious at catalyzing neurogenesis and enhancing neuroplasticity of all psychedelics, better than psilocybin, DMT, any of it. So if you're using it specifically for metaprogramming, or you're using psychedelics for metaprogramming, that's the one to use. In this sense, ayahuasca for emotional trouble. The mushrooms are kind of like in between, in the nether regions of pure intellect and emotion, and then LSD is just the brain self-engineering tool. So anyways, pranayama combined with moderate doses of LSD, the fourfold breath. 4 because stability. So whenever you create a universe, when you do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you make a circle and then you make 4 points, because these are the 4 fundamental forces of physics. These are the 4 directions. These are the 4 archangels. They're the 4 legs of a chair. You know what I mean? Stability. So you're creating a new universe for yourself. You're using the fourfold breath. And inhaling you are focusing on the sensation or the emotion that you're trying to retain. And then exhaling, you are, well, okay, so 4, take a breath, 4 in, hold it for 4, out for 4, keep it distended for 4. And during this process, you are retaining a certain, focusing on positive thing that you're trying to retain at the new program you're trying to write. I'm not going to smoke anymore or whatever. And then while you're retaining it, the same thing. And when you exhale, you have to exhale all of the air all the way down to the bottom of your diaphragm, get it all out over a 4 count, hold it out for 4. And when you're exhaling, you're feeling the shit that you want out that doesn't serve you. And I did that for, I think, only an hour once after being up all night on 100 micrograms of LSD. And I forgot the next day that I even smoked after 20 years of like pretty much chain smoking until I found a pouch of tobacco in my pocket. And I was like, holy crap. I didn't even think about it for the first time in decades. And that's all it took. So, renovation by fire. And people say, you know, you should be able to do this naturally. And it's like, no, you shouldn't. You know, go to the moon naturally. Let me just jump, dude. You know, let me know how that works out for you. You know what I mean? It's just technology. You can't compete with someone who has 100 times the neuroplasticity, and the normal brain can't compete with a brain that has 100 times the neuroplasticity and 100 times the neurogenesis. And it's been measured up to 1,000 times normal. Up to 1,000 times. It is also true, however, that too much neuroplasticity can fuck your brain up. So that 1,000x may not actually be desirable. In fact, psilocybin becomes a point of diminishing returns, but worse than that. Like it becomes counterproductive after about 2.5 grams of psilocybe cubensis, because it actually, instead of enhancing neuroplasticity and catalyzing neurogenesis, it starts to reverse. So be aware of that. You know, you don't want to take heroic doses of mushrooms on a regular basis. You want to do that, you know, every 6 months, and then you want to take small to moderate doses if you want to enhance cognition and that sort of thing. I am trying to set up a Shopify store to sell a certain brand of colloidal gold. Hopefully early this week we'll have something put together. So I'm that plug, I guess. You can just email me. Yeah, so check out our website. The retreat, November in the jungle. We still have some space. The last one was pretty cool for me as well, because, you know, not only just from, you know, seeing people have all these insights and lives totally transformed and all that kind of good stuff, but I also received a lot of healing myself directly from the medicine, which I'm feeling a lot more present and optimistic, I guess, after these experiences. I had some surgeries a while back that rendered me kind of immobilized and also quite broke. Still to this day, so it is very helpful if you guys support us, because we're not yet over the medical expense crisis, which I'm just absolutely so goddamn tired of. You know what I mean? It happens, and I'm looking a little bit tired, so I'm going to go maybe to bed. And thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. Support the channel. Appreciate all of you. Get ready. Paradigm shift is on us. Good night.